The hallway smelled like bleach and rain as Emily pushed the door, and the world narrowed to the beep that skipped then steadied like a lie. Her heart could not swallow. "Dr. Harris," said Emily, "we did everything we could," and the syllables felt like glass in her lungs. She stared at Noah, 7 and small, his lashes damp with oxygen, and time turned viscous and cruel. Emily said, "No, not like this," but the room answered with sterile quiet, and the hiss of the vent. Outside, thunder rolled, a low grief that matched the tremor in her hands. The clock ticked with a scolding patience, each second a verdict she could not appeal. Dr. Harris said, "There is nothing more we can do tonight," and the fluorescent light made the word "nothing" bloom like frost. Emily remembered the dinosaur stickers he chose, green and loud, now dull against the IV pole. A nurse adjusted a sheet, merciful and gentle, while Emily's knees thought about surrendering. Emily said, "Noah, I'm here." And the words were a bridge over fire. She pressed her palm to his, tiny and cool, and begged the air to keep moving. The hallway swallowed Emily as the door clicked shut, and the ceiling tiles became a map she could not read without sobbing in the margins. She leaned against the vending machine, and felt its hum steady her rage. Emily said, "Breathe," and the word sounded like an order given to a riot. Her phone buzzed with unpaid reminders, each one a small judge, and she ignored them like mosquitoes in a storm. The nurse passed with quiet shoes and mercy eyes, and Emily tried to borrow courage from their calm. Dr. Harris said, "We will monitor him closely," and the promise was a thread she feared would snap. A stretcher rolled by, wheels whispering, and she tasted tin and guilt. Emily said, "I should have seen it sooner," as if foresight were a medicine she could have afforded. Rain drummed on the skylight, turning the light into gray rainwater, and time stretched like a bruise. She pulled Noah's sticker from her pocket, the green dinosaur softened by her palm. Emily said, "Hold on, baby," and the words trembled like a bridge over black water. Emily sank into a plastic chair that tried to squeak but thought better of it, and the waiting room flowers pretended not to be dying. A child's cartoon played without sound, mouths open in cheerful lies. Emily said, "Noah loves the green ones," and her voice cracked on the memory of gummy bears. Dr. Harris said, "We ruled out infection," and the word "ruled" felt cruel, like a gavel on her chest. Insurance forms glared from her bag, corners dog-eared like hungry teeth. Emily said, "We will find a way," and the promise had no map, only a compass spinning. A janitor traced patient circles with a mop, hallowing the chairs with clean. The clock insisted on honesty, marching on. Emily stared at a poster about resilience, and wanted to tear it down. She pressed her fist to her ribs, and counted inhales like beads. Emily said, "He is not a case," and the room flinched even if no one showed it. The nurse guided Emily back with a nod that knew grief, and doors opened like exhausted eyelids. Machines blinked in their patient alphabet, and Noah slept beneath a ship of wires. Emily said, "Mom is right here," and her voice braided itself to the oxygen hiss. Dr. Harris said, "We will adjust his meds and watch for changes," and the sentence stacked careful blocks against a storm. The rain softened, making the window an aching mirror. Emily touched Noah's hair and remembered Sunday mornings with pancakes and flour on freckles. She swallowed the shame that rose when bills flashed like hazard lights in her mind. Emily said, "I am not leaving you," and her spine found a stubborn line. The nurse nodded again, a lighthouse in soft shoes. The room exhaled an almost peace, fragile as glass. Emily closed her eyes and traded sleep for vigilance, a bargain she signed with shaking hands. The storm thinned to a whisper, and the night settled like a heavy coat across the hospital's shoulders. Emily sat, elbows on knees, and wrote a prayer on the inside of her teeth. Emily said, "If there is a door, open it," and the plea hovered like fog. Dr. Harris said, "Call if anything changes," and left a trail of careful certainty that dissolved at the threshold. Noah's fingers twitched, a small rebellion that lit a candle in her chest. She remembered his first bike wobble, his proud bruise, his laugh like a bell. Emily said, "I will pay, I will sell, I will crawl if I must," and the Val pulled blood to her face. The clock rolled to 10:02 p.m., smug and steady. She tucked a green dinosaur under Noah's palm like a flag. The room hummed with stubborn life. Emily said from pain, "We will find a road," and the sentence became a hinge that refused to rust. Morning cracked through the blinds like hesitant fingers, and Emily rose from the stiff hospital chair with the grace of someone carrying an invisible mountain. Her body ached with the memory of too many double shifts, her hands still raw from the soap of the diner where she worked nights. Emily said, "I can't break, not now." And the whisper clung to the linoleum like a secret. She checked her phone, 2 missed calls from her boss, 1 from her landlord, and a text warning about overdue bills. The screen glared as if it had no mercy. A nurse said, "You need rest," but Emily laughed softly, the sound frayed and weightless. She pulled Noah's blanket higher, her fingers tracing the dinosaurs stitched in fading green. Emily said, "You were my reason, baby," and the words were half lullaby, half vow. The city outside pushed on with sirens and traffic. But inside the room, Emily's world was a fragile heartbeat away from collapse. Still, she stood straighter, daring the morning not to break her. The cafeteria smelled of burnt coffee and forgotten hours, and Emily sat alone at a corner table, her tray carrying toast that felt like cardboard. Her uniform peeked from her bag, stained with last night's grease, and she remembered the diner's neon hum that never slept. Emily said, "Work, hospital work again," and her words dropped like coins in a broken jar. Her phone buzzed again, the landlord's name lighting up like a curse, and she pressed decline with trembling fingers. A mother across the room spooned yogurt into her toddler's mouth, and the sound of giggles carved into Emily's ribs like both gift and wound. She said, "Noah laughs louder than that," and her lips twitched at the memory. The cafeteria clock showed 7:45, accusing her of being late already. She wrapped the toast in a napkin, pocketing it like gold. Emily said, "We keep moving," and rose, shoulders sharp against the morning crowd. Emily walked to the bus stop, rain threatening from the heavy sky, and the city air tasted of metal and exhaust. She tightened her coat and clutched her bag like armor. Emily said, "I'll make it through the shift," though her legs protested like old hinges. Cars rushed by, splashing puddles that mirrored flashing lights from billboards. A man in a suit cursed into his phone, and Emily flinched as if his anger might spill into her. She remembered Noah's laugh when she used to point out silly clouds, and the memory steadied her spine. The bus arrived groaning, its windows streaked with yesterday's rain, and she climbed aboard, scanning for an empty seat. Emily said, "One more day," and her reflection in the glass looked older than 32. She pressed her forehead to the window, watching the city blur into a restless watercolor. The diner's bell rang sharp as Emily pushed the door, and the smell of frying oil wrapped her like a second skin. Her manager barked, "You're late again," and she bit her tongue, swallowing excuses heavy as stone. She tied her apron with shaking hands, stains already ghosting the fabric. The counter lined with regulars, faces tired, and their chatter a low drone of survival. Emily said, "Coffee, extra sugar," to a man with weary eyes, her smile thinner than glass. The register spat receipts that curled like accusations. She remembered Noah drawing dinosaurs on napkins here, and her throat tightened. The order wheel spun endlessly, and her feet burned with each pass of the greasy floor. Emily said, "I'll finish, then go back," and the vow made her chest ache. The clock above the grill seemed louder than the sizzle, each tick a reminder that her boy was waiting. Night wrapped the city in neon fatigue. As Emily returned to the hospital, uniform wrinkled and hair tied in a tired knot, her body swayed as if the sidewalks tilted, but her hands clutched Noah's favorite snack, bought with her last crumpled bills. Emily said, "He'll smile when he sees this," and the thought burned brighter than any street lamp. The hospital doors opened with their hollow sigh, swallowing her into fluorescent quiet. She moved through the hall past wheelchairs and weary faces, each step a thread stitching her closer to her son. The nurse looked up and nodded gently, and Emily exhaled the weight of the day in fragments. She pushed open Noah's door, her chest full of prayers unsaid. Emily said, I made it back. And her voice stirred faintly, lids fluttering as if waiting for her voice. The room warmed with the fragile promise of her return. The monitors screamed in jagged waves at dawn, and Emily's heart sprinted before her body could stand. A nurse rushed in, words quick and clipped, and Emily clung to the bedrail as if steel could keep her upright. She said, "Noah, breathe," though the machine answered faster than his chest. Dr. Harris entered with furrowed brows, his voice flat as paper. "He's unstable." The phrase detonated inside her skull. Emily whispered, "Hold on, baby," and pressed her lips to his damp forehead, her tears cooling against his heat. The room pulsed with alarms, wires, and urgency, the walls shrinking like a cage. She thought of unpaid bills stacked like bricks at home, ready to bury her. Emily said, "I can't lose you, not after everything," and her voice cracked sharp as breaking glass. The nurse adjusted the IV, and Emily's vision blurred with fear, the sterile air suffocating her lungs. The waiting room became a battlefield of silence, as Emily sat with her head in her hands, hair tangled like threads of unraveling rope. Her boss left a voicemail. "If you don't show tonight, don't bother coming back." She replayed it until the words bruised her ears. Emily said, "I'll lose the job or I'll lose my son," and the impossible choice hollowed her chest. The vending machine hummed, mocking her hunger, while a stranger flipped through a magazine with bored detachment. Clock ticked above, merciless in its pacing. Emily said, "Please let me keep him," and her voice cracked into the airless space. She remembered Noah's gummy bear smile, sticky fingers clutching her palm. The nurse finally returned, whispering, "He's stable for now." Relief flooded her like cold water, leaving her shivering in her seat. Emily folded her arms across herself, armor against the storm of choices sharpening around her. The landlord's voice echoed in Emily's voicemail, sharp as iron. "Rent's overdue again, Emily. Last warning." Her phone buzzed like a wasp in her pocket as she sat in the hallway outside Noah's room, knees pulled tight to her chest. She said, "I'll sell what's left," though her apartment was already stripped of comfort. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and fear, the tiles echoing every footstep. A social worker approached, papers heavy in her hands, offering words about assistance and charity that stung Emily's pride like nettles. Emily said, "I'll manage," though her voice trembled with exhaustion. She thought of Noah's laughter, how it deserved more than her fragile promises. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, unblinking and cold. She buried her face in her palms, a quiet sob escaping. Emily said, "I can't fail him," and the sentence rang like a fragile vow in the sterile silence. The diner smelled of grease and old coffee, as Emily tied her apron with hands that shook from sleepless nights. Her manager said, "This is your last chance," and his voice cracked like a whip. Customers blurred together into a chorus of demands, plates clattering like war drums. Emily said, coming right up, though her throat burned with swallowed panic. A waitress whispered, "You look pale," and Emily forced a smile brittle as glass. She spilled coffee on a receipt, her hands betraying her with tremors. The register blinked red, numbers unforgiving. Emily said, "I'll finish the shift, then run back," though her body screamed for collapse. Her reflection in the stainless steel counter was unrecognizable, eyes hollow and haunted. The clock above the grill moved faster than truth, each minute slicing away what little she had left to give. The storm outside matched the one inside Emily's chest as she rushed back to the hospital, apron still stained and shoes soaked from puddles. Her phone buzzed again, her sister's voice message cut sharp, "You can't do this alone." Emily said, "I have no choice," and her breath fogged the glass as she pushed through the sliding doors. The lobby hummed with murmurs and faint cries, every sound pressing her bones heavier. She sprinted to Noah's room, heart knocking her ribs. Dr. Harris stood at the foot of the bed, his jaw stiff, papers in hand. He said, "We'll need to discuss more options," and the words stretched dark between them. Emily staggered closer, whispering, "Please, not another bill, not another wall." Noah stirred faintly, his small hand twitching, and Emily broke into tears, the world spinning like glass about to shatter. The room Dr. Harris chose was too calm for the way his hands folded, and Emily felt the chair bite her spine like a warning. He said, "We ran additional labs," and the word additional thudded like a gavel. Papers slid across the table, ink dense as storm clouds, and her breath shortened to coins. Dr. Harris said, "There are traces of a beta blocker not in Noah's chart," and the syllables stung like ice water. Emily said, "That's impossible," because impossible was the only door that would open. He asked who handled Noah's medicine this week, and faces flickered like cards. Emily said, "I did, the nurses did," and then another face arrived, uninvited. Daniel had visited on Tuesday with flowers, and that old smile, promising help. Emily said he wouldn't, and the room answered with humming lights and the soft scrape of paper. Dr. Harris said, "We need to check the bottles," and the world tilted toward a cliff she had not seen. The security office smelled like dust and old electricity, and the monitors blinked a dozen small truths at once. A guard rewound Tuesday, the film stuttering, and Emily's pulse found a drum. She said, "That's his jacket," when Daniel appeared, 34 years old, lean, holding flowers he liked to call apologies. The footage showed a gentle touch on Noah's blanket, then a pocketed hand, then a tiny swap at the bedside tray. Emily said, "No," but the screen kept moving like a tide with no mercy. The nurse on duty leaned in and covered her mouth, whispering, "I never saw this angle." Dr. Harris said, "Pause there," and the image froze on the stolen movement. Emily's lungs forgot their instructions, and shame bit her hard. She had invited Daniel in because hope is stubborn. Emily said, "He hurt my son," and the sentence cracked the dim room open like a flare. Daniel arrived with the same careful smile that once fooled Summers, and the corridor tightened its jaw. Emily said, "Why did you touch his meds?" and her voice marched like a blade. Daniel said, "It was just to calm his heart rate," and the lie smelled like cheap cologne. He stepped closer, 34 and restless, eyes scanning for exits that didn't exist. Emily said, "You wanted me scared enough to need you," and the truth rang like metal. He flinched, then said, "The bills, I have a guy who could help if we qualified." The word qualified curdled in the fluorescent air. Dr. Harris stood behind her, quiet as a witness. Emily said, "You risked his life for leverage," and the hallway seemed to lean away from him. Daniel's charm crumpled, revealing something hungry and small. Emily said, "Back away," and for the first time he obeyed. Silence followed like a shadow as Emily stepped into the family lounge, where a vending light haloed the carpet stains. Shame and rage wrestled in her ribs, each demanding the last word. Emily said, "I opened the door to him," and the confession hurt like gravel. The nurse sat beside her, 40, steady, and said, "Trust is not a crime." The sentence softened the edges without dulling them. Emily thought of every time she chose hope because it was cheaper than despair. Emily said, "If Noah," and the rest stuck like bone. The nurse placed a hand on her shoulder, warm and ordinary. She said, "Choose what protects him now." The words were a ladder in a well. Emily nodded, gathering the scraps of her courage, stitching them fast. Emily said, "I will sign whatever keeps him safe," and her voice stopped shaking. Outside, rain started again, small and relentless. Paperwork gathered like storm clouds on a clipboard as a security officer cleared his throat at the doorway. Emily said, "I'll file the report," and the words felt like building a door where there was a wall. Dr. Harris outlined new protocols, voice firm, and hope became procedural instead of mythical. Emily signed her name, each letter a shield. She said, "No unsupervised visitors," and the policy became a promise. Daniel's number was blocked, a small victory that still shook her hand. She walked back to Noah's room and found him sleeping softer, chest lifting like a tide that believed in shore. Emily said, "I chose you over my fear," and the sentence settled like warm light. She tucked the green dinosaur closer to his palm and stood sentry. The night outside pressed its face to the glass, but inside, vigilance glowed. Morning broke thin and cold as Emily stood outside Daniel's apartment, the hallway smelling of bleach and old promises. She said, "Open the door," and the knob rattled like a guilty heart. Daniel said, "You're overreacting," but the words slid like oil across ice. She held the printout from security, edges creasing under her grip. Emily said, "You dosed my son to make me desperate," and her voice carved the space into truth. He reached for charm and found it empty, shoulders slack under a cheap jacket. Daniel said, "I tried to help us qualify," and the excuse hissed. Neighbors' doors breathed, listening for a spectacle, but Emily kept her rage clean. She said, "You don't get to stand near what you almost broke," and the hallway tilted toward her resolve. Daniel's eyes skittered, catching on exits that would not forgive him. Emily said, "I choose Noah over fear," and the lock inside her chest clicked to steel. They met in the hospital's mediation room where plants tried to look alive, and a clock counted choices. Dr. Harris said, "We will document and proceed," his tone precise as sutures. Daniel stared at the tabletop as if redemption might hatch there. Emily said, "Say what you did," and the air thinned. Daniel said, a small dose to slow his heart, and the words shattered like dropped glass. The nurse recorded with calm hands, while the guard watched the door. Emily said, "You gambled my child to own my panic," and her breath steadied against the truth. Dr. Harris said, "Future access is revoked," and policies became armor. Daniel sagged into himself, hollowed by exposure. Emily said, "You will pay the bills you spawned," and dignity rose like daylight over wreckage. The clock ticked approval, steady and indifferent. A sudden alarm split the corridor, sharp as lightning finding a tree, and Emily ran before thought could argue. In Noah's room the monitor stuttered, a frantic metronome, and the nurse moved fast, voice steady as rope. Emily said, "I'm here," and the words bridged a chasm. Dr. Harris said, "Possible arrhythmia, adjusting now," and his hands turned urgency into choreography. Emily's knees trembled but refused collapse, her fingers lacing Noah's small wrist like prayer. She said, "Follow my voice," and the syllables softened the panic. The waveform jittered, then climbed toward rhythm as meds kissed his veins. The room held its breath, then exhaled as order returned by inches. Emily said, "Stay with me, baby," and Noah's eyelids trembled like moth wings. Relief came hot and flooding, and she let it burn through the fear it found. When the quiet settled, Emily stepped into the chapel where dust motes floated like tired saints. The stained glass threw thin rivers of color across her shoes. Emily said, "I do not know how to forgive him," and the confession scratched her throat. A volunteer straightened candles and glanced up, offering silence roomy enough for pain. Emily said, "If I keep hating, it will live in Noah's room," and the truth sat beside her like an old friend. She pictured Daniel's smallness, and saw a prison he built with mirrors. Emily said, "I release him to the distance, not to absolution," and the words fitted her ribs like braces. She asked for strength shaped like patience, not thunder. She asked for a path that protected without hardening. Emily said, "I will forgive so healing has somewhere to land," and the prayer finally sounded like hers. Evening wrapped the ward in a softer blue as Emily returned to Noah, carrying the day's new spine. She touched his hair and felt gratitude like clean rain. Emily said, "I forgive to make room for you," and the sentence opened a window. Dr. Harris entered, eyes kind behind fatigue, and said, "He's responding, slow but steady." The words landed like a chair placed under her. Emily said, "Thank you for not letting fear captain this ship," and he smiled the tired smile of men who steer storms. She pressed the green dinosaur into Noah's palm until his fingers remembered holding. Emily said, "From pain we grow bones," and the room agreed in quiet. Outside, the storm retired behind a modest moon. Emily kept watch, not as a hunted animal, but as a builder guarding a door she had just finished framing. Morning found Emily in a chair shaped by her vigil, and the ward sounded softer, like a hymn sung under breath. She checked Noah's monitor and watched the green line like a shoreline returning. Emily said, I will not mistake quiet for defeat, and the promise steadied her spine. The nurse smiled and said, he's holding his own, and the words threaded warmth through the sterile air. Emily opened a small notebook and listed bills, calls, and the mercy of strangers who had sent soup. She crossed out panic and wrote patience, then circled it twice. Emily said, we will rebuild in inches, and the room agreed with its careful beeps. Dr. Harris stepped in, eyes wrinkled with fatigue, and said, we can wean the meds slowly. Relief did not leap. It walked, measured and real. Emily touched Noah's hair and let faith be a small, durable light. By noon, paperwork grew like a second language, and Emily learned to pronounce it without surrender. A social worker explained options, careful and clear, and Emily listened with a pen like a compass. Emily said, we need a plan that outlives this week, and the sentence felt like a door finally opening. They mapped payment relief, transport, and home care visits that would not drown her. The nurse said, you're not alone, and the phrase reached the sore place pride once guarded. Emily signed forms with a hand that shook, but not from fear. She said, this is how we climb, and the ink dried like small ladders. Dr. Harris noted milestones and cautions, drawing a path instead of a cliff. The hours lost their teeth, and became steps she could count without bleeding. Afternoon, light painted rectangles on the floor as Emily read to Noah from a book about brave animals. His eyelids fluttered and settled, the restfulness earned, not borrowed. Emily said, the turtle wins by refusing to quit, and her smile reached the tired parts. She peeled an orange and filled the room with honest citrus, a scent that remembered kitchens without fear. The nurse said, let's try him without the mask for a minute, and Emily's breath hitched but held. Noah stirred, a small sound like a coin dropped in a well, and his chest rose steady. Emily said, you're doing it, and her eyes shone without spilling. She pressed the green dinosaur to his palm, and his fingers closed, slow and sure. Time felt less like a judge, and more like a patient friend. Evening cooled the glass, and Emily stepped into the courtyard where planters kept stubborn green. She called her landlord and said, I have assistance arranged, and the apology that followed did not taste like defeat. A friend from the diner texted, promising to cover 2 shifts until she found her feet. Emily said, thank you for holding the rope, and the gratitude unclenched her jaw. She blocked Daniel's last burner number, and felt the silence tidy the corners of her mind. The nurse found her under a dim lamp and said, he asked for you in his sleep. Emily laughed, a sound that remembered sunlight. She said, tell him I was counting the stars with his name, and the metaphor finally felt like truth. The sky answered with a single brave star. Night returned gentle, and Emily stood guard with a posture no longer made of flinching. Dr. Harris said, barring setbacks, we plan a step down tomorrow, and the sentence settled like a quilt. Emily said, we'll take the small stairs, and the image warmed the air. She cleaned the bedside table, aligning chapstick, notebook, and a single wrapped snack against the coming dawn. Noah sighed in his sleep, the sound a quiet boat on a safe harbor. Emily said, from here we rebuild with honest tools, and the vow fit her palms. She texted the diner, not with panic, but with a schedule that respected breath. The monitors kept a humble rhythm, and the window framed a moon that had outlived every storm. Emily said, we made it through the dark, and for the first time the dark agreed. Dawn rinsed the ward in soft gold, and the step-down unit breathed like a calm sea around them. Emily said, today we move, and the words felt like shoes that finally fit. A wheelchair waited, humble and bright, as if it knew ceremonies matter. The nurse said, slow and steady, and her smile threaded courage through the room. Noah blinked awake, 7 and brave, fingers finding the green dinosaur like a compass. Emily said, your ship is ready, Captain, and her laugh sounded almost unbroken. Dr. Harris entered with a tired grin and a discharge checklist that looked less like a verdict. He said, we go 1 careful mile at a time, and the plan felt merciful. Emily signed her name and felt it become a road. Emily said, from here we build, and the morning agreed with a quiet, fearless light. They rolled past doors that had memorized their footsteps, and the corridor felt wider than any street. Emily said, "Wave goodbye, buddy," and Noah lifted his small hand like a flag. The nurse said, "Come back only for good news," and tucked a card into Emily's pocket. Dr. Harris said, "Call if anything worries you," and the safety net hummed with quiet strength. Emily breathed in the antiseptic air as if to thank it for sheltering them. A volunteer held the elevator, and time slowed to let them all fit. Emily said, "We leave fear here," and left it like a coat they would not reclaim. The doors slid shut, silver and calm, and their reflections looked more alive. Noah whispered, "Home?" and hope answered before words did. Emily said home, and the syllable cleared a weathered sky. The city was rinsed by last night's storm, and the sidewalk glittered like a promise they could defend. Emily said, "Breathe this air, it belongs to us," and Noah grinned around the wind. A bus sighed by, ordinary and glorious, and the world did not end, which felt like news. Emily's phone chimed with a friend's text, offering rides for appointments, and gratitude loosened her jaw. She said, "We accept help because it lets us lift more," and the lesson settled well. Cars pooled light across puddles that made little galaxies. Noah pressed the dinosaur against the window and claimed each reflection as treasure. Emily said, "We take small steps and count them anyway," and her heart matched the pace. The sky opened a pale blue door and told them to walk through. Home smelled like laundry and courage when they finally crossed the threshold, and the quiet felt earned. Emily said, "Welcome back, Commander," and Noah saluted with sleepy pride. She set a chair by the window and made a throne from spare pillows. The neighbor knocked with soup, shy and kind, and community entered on gentle feet. Emily said, "We will schedule the medicines like stars in a steady sky," and the clock approved. She pinned the discharge plan to the fridge and wrote a sane week for the first time in months. Noah whispered, "Can the dinosaur guard the night?" and the toy nodded in her hands. Emily said, "He will stand watch while we sleep," and her shoulders unhooked from the ceiling. The apartment felt small but honest, which was large enough today. Night arrived with a hush that did not threaten, and Emily watched Noah's breathing like a tide she had learned to trust. She said, "I would do it all again," and the vow tasted clean, not desperate. The room held the day gently, letting it cool without breaking. Emily took the dinosaur and tucked it in the crook of Noah's arm like a green moon. She whispered, "For you I would," and the words did not ask permission from the dark. Outside, a distant siren passed like a memory moving on. Emily sat, not as a sentinel braced for war, but as a gardener waiting for morning. She said, "From pain to purpose," and the sentence fit the room like a soft door closing. Noah sighed, shifted, and slept deeper. The silence that followed was the kind that stays.